This is Starship, the first of a long line of space games for the Atari VCS. A port of an arcade game at the time called Starship 1, it was one of the 9 launch games available for the console back in 1977. So here's the cartridge itself, not really much to look at. No artwork, just the name and a list of various game modes included. I do like the red box with a 40% opacity they used to color the text. Alright, let's just pop in the cartridge to the Atari and blast some aliens. Or something. Probably aliens. Okay, that's fun. Hitting the reset switch to start the game doesn't reset the enemy positions. So I guess you just have to wait for a gap and hope to not run into something? Okay, now what's wrong? Nothing seems to be working. I can't steer the ship or shoot or anything. Is there something wrong with the controller? Alright, let's try this one my sister's rat chewed on. And it still works at least. Ah, it's the same thing. I can't move or shoot. Is this like a Raiders of the Lost Ark thing? Does it need to be in the second controller port for some reason? Yeah, that's it. Now we're cooking. No clue why that would be, but it's working, so that's all I care about. The game itself is fairly simple. Using a first-person perspective, you move the targeting reticle with the joystick and fire with the button. According to the manual, you're tasked with destroying enemy space objects, including starfighters, those orange ounce abbreviations, flying saucers, those things that look like blue sailor caps, and the wonderfully generic space robots, which I assumed were just aliens. The fighters are worth 1 point, the saucers are worth 2, and the space robots, TM, are worth 3. Those orange dot clusters are asteroids and they can't be destroyed. You just have to fly your ship around them to avoid a collision. If you hit anything, you lose a point. Each game lasts exactly 2 minutes and 16 seconds for some reason, so you're just trying to get as many points as you can within that time limit. And, well, that's pretty much it. I generally don't expect much complexity from Atari games, but I will say this is a little bit simplistic even by that metric. It mostly feels like it's missing something, like one mechanic or twist would have moved it from a basic shooting gallery to an addictive retro arcade-style game. Or maybe just difficulty. Once you get the controller working, you'd almost have to go out of your way to crash into something. Let's see if the other game variations can change that. Game 2 is literally just Game 1 again, but with only one enemy space object or asteroid that can appear on screen at once, instead of 2. I'm honestly not sure what that's supposed to achieve. Is it supposed to be easier? Harder? It's not exactly harder, per se, there's just less opportunity to score points. That also means when an asteroid spawns, there's no way to score points at all until you get past it. Not a fan. Game 3 is just Game 2 again, but at warp speed. Now the enemies are so fast that you barely have time to hit anything. It seems like you're almost expected to anticipate where the next enemy is going to spawn in order to get the sluggish reticle over to it in time. But their next spawn point is randomized, so that's not exactly possible. It feels like you just kind of have to get lucky. Or at least it did until I realized that you can lead your shots, in a manner of speaking. Your laser missiles continue to follow the reticles until they fully disappear, and actually it seems like they continue even after they've disappeared for like a half second or something. Once I learned this, I actually found myself enjoying this mode a good bit more. Actually, this might be my favorite yet, if only because it makes you actually have to try. On to Game 4. Yeah, so either I suck at this, or it's near impossible. It keeps the speed of Game 3, but has 2 enemies spawning at the same time. It feels like they massively overcompensated for the ease of the earlier game modes. Maybe I just need to play it more to figure out a better strategy, but with 14 games left to cover, I think I'll just move on. 5 through 9 are all 2-player games. The general idea is that one player controls the ship, as usual, while the other player controls the space module. The space module player has to try to avoid getting shot by the starship player for 2 minutes and 16 seconds, at which point the game switches roles and lets the second player have their revenge. Your one defense as the space module is that you can go invisible within a certain radius around the reticle. It's kind of a neat idea, but it feels like it really needs something. Maybe if it were shorter, like a minute 8 each? Game 6 introduces asteroids for the starship player to avoid, which is definitely a step up from 5. You can at least try and make use of the other player's need to avoid the asteroids this time. It forces the starship player to focus on more than just mercilessly blasting the space module player to pieces. 7 feels like the perfect variation in this mode. By mixing the stress of dodging the fast-moving asteroids from games 3 and 4, it adds the perfect amount of chaos to the matches. This was by far my favorite version of the multiplayer modes. Game 8 switches out the asteroids for enemy space objects. Shooting them will still give you points, and it actually ended up seeming like the better strategy to target them instead. When they move this slowly, they're incredibly easy to hit. The module player isn't as much. Game 9 makes the enemies move much faster, so the balancing feels much better here. The next mode is called Warp Drive, which is back to being a single-player game. This time around, you're not shooting anything. In fact, pressing the button doesn't shoot at all. Instead, holding it down will cause your ship to speed up to warp speed. There are only asteroids to dodge, and the scoring is now based on the distance you can cover within that time limit. Hitting an asteroid causes you to lose a point. Once again, it's kind of fun, but it still ends up being a bit too basic for my tastes. Game 11 is the same as the previous, but with 2 asteroids on screen at once. It's a bit tougher and therefore more fun in my opinion. And that's basically it for Warp Drive. But there is one more game mode called Lunar Lander. Wait, Lunar Lander? Like the surprisingly complex Atari arcade game about managing your speed, angle, and fuel reserves to make a precise landing on the moon? That Lunar Lander? No, that can't be. That game came out in '79, 2 years after this game. So, what is the Starship version of Lunar Lander? Maybe an early proof of concept? Not quite. I'm trying to give this mode a fair chance, but it's not exactly easy. You control the Lunar Lander's movement with the joystick, and try and move over the fidgety moon and press the button to, destroy it? Wait, was I the enemy space object all along? Okay, after a brief check in the instruction manual, it turns out that that's you landing on it. Sure. So you fly to the moon and press the button to fire the rockets, at which point it blinks and disappears, accompanied by the same enemy hit sound I've been hearing all game. I don't know how I could have misinterpreted that as blowing up the moon. This is honestly the least enjoyable mode in this game. It takes the simplicity to the next level by removing the very concept of a threat. At least in games 1 and 2, you could still theoretically take a hit if you took too long to line up a target. The moons barely move, and with their large size it means they're easier to hit than ever. Lunar Lander is essentially all the fun and challenge of moving a mouse cursor over to an icon and clicking on it, but with an Atari joystick controller. The next variation introduces meteors. Touching them destroys your lander, resets your position away from the moon, and subtracts a point. They're pretty easy to dodge, but at least there's something. Game 14 speeds up the meteors considerably. I still think this is the weakest mode in the game, but I'll admit that the speed increase makes this one almost fun. The last 3 games are the same as the previous 3, but multiplayer. Players take turns controlling the moon and trying to escape the Lunar Lander player. And that's it. All 17 game modes and variations covered. I do love retro games, but I think most of that love comes from a post-Space Invaders industry. Similar to other early games from around this time, Starship really feels like a relic of a bygone era. A time when being able to give input to things on the TV screen and have them respond accordingly was incredibly novel. But I still find there to be a charm in that. It may be a bit rudimentary compared to later games in the Atari VCS library, but I'm glad I played it. Sometimes simple games like this are a nice change of pace from modern gaming.